Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, in last class we have seen the features and purpose of folk art. Today let us see some of the folk art around the world. Just to recapitulate, the things that can be considered as folk art can be any form of visual art, performing art, traditional craft like pottery, basketry, etc., tangible objects of cultural, religious and ritual expressions, objects of traditional knowledge such as recipe or the methods of weaving, etc. So, in this course what we are trying to do is not to understand the folk arts from outside in, but to understand them inside out. This is one of the basic criteria of folkloristic, that you do not understand things, that you do not see the folkloric items from outside, but you try to understand what it entails for the society as a whole. So, we try to understand them from inside out. Let us see some of the folk arts from Japan. Dr. Soetsu Yanagi is one of the very prominent member of Japanese folklore movement. He was the founder and director of Japanese Folk Art Museum. I have put a phrase from him which according to him, folk art means. Folk art is not, as some authors have suggested, merely an unsophisticated reflection of the culture of the cities, but an indigenous creation of the ordinary people of small towns and villages, especially those who are cut off from the mainstream of urban civilization. This does not mean that they are wholly isolated from the dominant culture. No doubt influences and modifies their culture, their work, but folk art has a tradition which has remained unchanged over generations, sometimes even centuries. So, that is impossible to date it with accuracy. In 1916, Yanagi made his first trip to Korea out of curiosity for Korean craft. This led to the establishment of the Korean Folk Craft Museum in 1924 and the coining of the term Minji by Yanagi. In 1926, the folk art movement was formally declared by him. Yanagi collected pots used by common people in the Edo and Meiji period that were disappearing in rapidly urbanizing Japan. In 1936, the Japanese Folk Art Craft Museum was established. The Meiji movement challenged society's narrow definition of art. Traditionally, many people think of art as something produced only by artisans, separate from functional items produced by craftsmen. Minji instead focuses on everyday objects produced by average people as opposed to highly refined works of art produced by professional artists. Minji can also be seen as a response to Japan's rapid industrialization, as it places importance to things made with hand rather than commercial factory. It is also seen as a method of preserving culture and heritage. The philosophical pillar of Minji is handcrafted art of ordinary people. According to Yanagi, utilitarian objects made by common people are beyond beauty and ugliness. Yanagi pointed out that there has to be certain criteria for an object to be considered as a Minji art. These are that the object should be made and produced by hand. Minji art should be produced in large quantity, mostly by hand. The handmade nature of this art is at the core of the Minji movement, and the fact that it is produced in large quantity is related to the utilitarian aspect of Minjai. So, the object not only has to be produced by hand, but it also should have utilitarian purpose. So, therefore, it has to be made in large quantity for many people to be able to use it. So, these are the two first criteria, that it has to be made with hand and it has to be available to a lot of people. So, it has to be produced in a bigger quantity. Second criteria is inexpensive. Minji art should be inexpensive, simple and practical in design. Unlike decorated luxury items, the simplicity and inexpensiveness is the charm of Minji. An inexpensive complex item would not be easily accessible to the masses, betraying the fundamental idea behind the movement. The design should also have arisen naturally over time to best suit the need of those using it. So, it should be inexpensive and it should be available to the masses easily. If it is expensive and it is not available to everyone, then it would not qualify as a Minji item. Third criteria is used by the masses and functional in daily life. Minji art should not be only functional, but also actually used by the masses. So, it should have utilitarian value. Yanagi argued that beauty of these objects come from the actual usage, not simply being admired. Their use also gives them the cultural and regional authenticity. So, it should not be only objects of gratification, they should not be only pleasing to the eyes, but they should be utilitarian. They should be able, we should be able to use them in everyday life. Fourth criteria was representative of the region in which they are produced. This reflects Japanese culture's appreciation for regional variation, and indeed Minji art often has distinguishing characteristics unique to specific region of Japan. Each object represents a small cultural legacy that gives it a value beyond its aesthetic. So, it should talk about the region that it comes from. It should have specific features, the essence should be communicated, the region's essence should be communicated through these objects. So, this was one of the criteria. The last one is made by anonymous craftsmen. Traditionally, Minji arts is anonymous and individual artists should not expect recognition. However, in modern times many people agreed that society should embrace and celebrate the artisans and craftspeople who help keep tradition and culture alive, and that this should be reflected in how the government designates certain people as living national treasure. So, Yanagi has said that the craftsmen should not look for recognition, they should be anonymous and it should only talk about the community that it belongs to. But later on people felt that artisans should be recognized, they should be appreciated, so that they get encouragement, and the government also takes adequate measures for the preservation and gives them recognition in the national scene also. So, these are the 5 criteria that Yanagi had pointed out for any object of art to be considered as a Minji art. Now, let us see some of the Japanese art. This is a Japanese embroidery, it is called Nihon Shishu in Japanese. It is a collection of embroidery techniques that originated more than 1600 years ago. Over time, as Shishu developed its own unique Japanese qualities and characteristics, it took on a more artistic purpose. According to historians, from the early Heian period, Japanese embroidery was primarily used for decorating the costume of the ladies of the imperial court. During these early stages, Shishu was only available to a select group. Only the highest rank of society could afford such costly work. However, after 1,000 years sleep, this cultural heritage is now available to a wider audience and continues to develop a more spiritual purpose. So, it has gone through a few changes over the time. Earlier it used to be expensive and it was only made for a certain section of the population, but now it has been available for a larger section of audience. So, this is Japanese wood mosaic technique and it is called yosogi. These are Japanese wooden box, and the art of making such boxes with traditional wood mosaic is called yosogi. The timbers of different colors are cut in rods and are glued together to form a geometrical pattern. The surface of the pattern is then sliced into these plates of wood which are then used to decorate all sort of things like coaster, vase, tray, etc. So, this is another folk art of Japan, which is a mosaic, making a mosaic out of different colored timbers. This is a porcelain pottery of Japan. It is called yakimono. Yakimono is one of the oldest Japanese craft dating to the Neolithic period. Japan has an exceptionally long successful history of ceramic production. Japan is distinguished by the unusual esteem that ceramic holds within its artistic traditions, owing to the enduring popularity of the tea ceremony. Since the 4th century, Japanese ceramic have been influenced by Chinese and Korean pottery. Japanese pottery is distinguished by two polarized aesthetic tradition. On the one hand, there is a tradition of very simple and roughly finished pottery, mostly in earthenware and using a muted palette of earthen colors. This relates to Zen Buddhism. The other tradition is of a highly finished and brightly colored factory ware, mostly in porcelain with complex and balanced decoration, which develops Chinese porcelain styles in a distinct way. A third tradition of simple but perfectly formed and glazed stonewares also relates more closely to both Chinese and Korean tradition. So, these are the three folk art form I wanted to show you from Japan. Now, from there let us move on to United States of America. United States of America, as you know, have 50 states, which has its own distinct flavor. This is a folk art from it is called from America, it is called arpilleras. These arpilleras are brightly colored patchworks pictures originally made by a group of women, also known as arpilleristas, in Chile during the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet during 1973 to 1990. Constructed from simple materials such as scrap of clothes, they initially depicted scenes of hardship and violence that many women experienced during the dictatorship. Arpilleras were made in workshop organized by a committee of the Chilean Catholic Church and then secretly distributed abroad through the church human rights group. Arpilleras have many common elements. Bits of fabrics are cut in the shapes of house, trees or objects and are stitched to the backing. Figures of people are almost always three-dimensional, with little rolled arms, heads and bodies coming out of flat background. Sticks, bits of foil, plastic or paper, dried beans and other commonly found material are frequently sewn or glued into the tapestry. Simple decorative top stitching fills in the details. Each arpillera is bordered by a colorful fabric binding, blanket stitch or crocketed wool edging. Over time, people in other Latin American countries adopted arpilleras as an art form. Among them were Peru, where some believe their three-dimensional doll-like figures are said to have originated. These arpilleras almost always depict an innocent, happy world. So, if you look closely into any folk art, you will see a host of meaning into it. You will see a you will get to know about it, has to tell you a story about its history, its origin, about the region it comes from. So, this is one such example. Next is a weave from the Navajo tribe of America. American Indian art encompasses everything from carving to weaving, each design telling a story through motifs and symbols that honor their heritage. Most surviving antique examples are anywhere from 1 to 200 years old. Many of these pieces were made from organic epipherral material, which has contributed to their wear and loss over the years. Today, contemporary Navajo art blends traditional crafts with the modern trends. It pays homage to indigenous art forms while pointing to the experimentation of American Indian artists across all media. Works of art that are centuries old as well as art made by living artists offer a unique glimpse of Navajo heritage. This is another folk art of America. These are dolls made by the Seminole tribe of Florida. The body of these dolls is made of palmetto husk. The clothing is sewed traditional women's dress, bright colors and beaded necklace and earrings. Seminoles were excellent wood carvers. Traditionally, they made many things out of wood, homes, cannons, etc. They also made dolls. They made two types of dolls. One was a little doll, about 2-inch tall. Each doll was dressed with fabric garments such as a Seminole woman or a man would wear. And the other type of doll was bigger, perhaps 10 to 18 inch, and carved out of wood in an odd way. Everything was elongated, as if it took a person and pulled it thin. It's a strangely attractive doll. Today, Seminole artists make both types of traditional dolls. So, as I told you that each craft, each art, each folk art tells you a story about the people it belongs to. You really have to look closely at them. Now, let us come to the Federal Republic of Germany. This is a typical dress of the women folk of Germany. It is called Dirndl. Dirndl varies from one region to another or even a village to another. The costume has various details according to the place of origin and social status of the wearer. There is also a distinction between the typical Dirndl and rural domestic clothing made from grey and colored linen, sometimes with leather bodice and trim. So, if you look at the folk costume, it will tell you about a lot about the wearer, what kind of social status he or she comes from, which region he or she comes from, which village he or she comes from. This is a wooden doll of Germany. The wooden doll also has a history. Scholars have recently taken a lot of interest in studying the wooden doll folk art form of Germany. So, these are, according to them, these are wooden toys from the Ergiberg mountains. Today, the Ergiberg mountains are situated on both sides of German-Czech border. In the German part of that belongs to the state of Saxony, wooden toys have been produced since the 18th century. Historians and ethnographers have often explained that the emergence of this home industry in terms of the healthy roots of folk art in that area. Ethnographer Manfred Bachmann presents its development in the late 19th century as a story of decline. He praises the variety of forms in the folk art of the second half of the 18th century and the beginning of 19th century, whereas in his view the toy production turned away from real folk art during the late 19th century. Ethnographer Conrad recently criticized this view and claimed that the folk art of wood carving in the west of the Ergiberg mountain remains separate from the commercial toy production further east. A recent view suggests that the toy production did not simply grow off folk art, nor did both exist separately, but the concept of folk art from the Ergiberg was invented at the beginning of the 20th century as a reaction to a deep crisis in the toy industry. Here, folk art did not give birth to the toy industry, the toy industry or rather its crisis gave birth to the folk art. So, this is a very interesting argument that the researchers have produced, that this folk art was invented actually because of a crisis in the toy industry, and there have been lots of debates and arguments produced. So, but it still remains a very interesting concept to understand within the folk art. This is the Bauernmaler of Germany. It is a folk art associated with Germany, Austria and Switzerland. The term comes from two words, Bauern, which means peasant or farmer, and malaria actually, which means painting. It originated in the Bavarian and Austrian Alps and the Swiss Appenzell, and is therefore also commonly referred to as Bavarian folk art. Although This art began as something very simple and naive. It has undergone many phases of evolution. There are many regional variations as the art spread throughout Europe from village to village. The Tolzer style originated from a town called Bad Tolz in South Germany. The most famous in the Tolzer rose, which has become a favorite with many folk artists. The Rossler style was painted mainly in beds and trunks by painters in village just north of Stuttgart. This style features not only flowers but also animals and peasant scenes, fruit basket, hut and thrills. The painting is generally with a combination of blues and greens as background and characteristic red border. The Wismut style was associated with Wismut, which is the metal mine in Eze mountains of Germany. It was applied as background or swan chest to imitate the silver chest of the wealthy, after which flowers were painted on them. Figures in old costumes and beautiful border around the edges are also featured in some trunks. The Hessian style, only trunks are painted in this style. The backgrounds were usually medium to a very dark blue. Flowers and borders on these pieces are usually quite primitive. The Franconian style is associated with Franconia, the northern region of Bavaria. The vases and flowers painted in the style are not as elaborate as those painted in lower Bavaria, but are still rather pretty. The Black Forest style in the southwest corner of Germany bordering Switzerland and France lies an area called Black Forest. The kind of painting originating from region is very different and resemble porcelain painting. Everywhere else in Germany, white overstrokes are used as highlights on flowers. Here the white from the background comes through the highlight. Most of the time the background is painted in either off-white or as almost black. So, looking at the folk art of these three countries, we understand a whole lot about the region, the country they come from. So, it is rightly said that folk art is mirror to the society. It talks about the history, it talks about its origin, it talks about the people who have made it and the socio-economic condition, the cultural values, the societal norms. We can understand a lot from looking at the folk art. At this point, I would like to make a distinction between the two disciplines of social science and humanities. One is cultural anthropology and one is folkloristics. Often there is a confusion between the two disciplines, so I thought it is a good idea to understand what the two disciplines entail. The difference lay not in any intrinsic difference between the two in their respective subject matter, but the difference is rather historical in the origin of the two disciplines. They correspond to how the Euro-American scholars have identified themselves with the people whose customs and cultures they study. Cultural anthropology, because of its early concentration on people with hunting and horticulture economics and assumption that they were relics of a past human societal evolution, had been viewed more as the study of non-Western people. The discipline of rural sociology and folkloristic in the United States and discipline of folk life in Europe, on the other hand, dealt with Western people. Irrespective of its disciplinary origin, folkloristics does not view its object of study as remnants of past cultures. Instead, it focuses on the collective knowledge of a community at the present, in the midst of past and the future. So, friends, today we have seen some of the folk art from around the world. From the next class, we will concentrate more on India, and next class would concentrate some of the folk art form of India and how they have been studied and what they tell us about the region they come from. Thank you very much.